"Dad," he said, "if I tell you, Mom will disappear." My son's voice didn't sound like a child's voice when he said that. It was too quiet. Too careful. Like every word had to pass through fear before it reached me. I was standing in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between us. It was 9:17 p.m. I remember the time because everything in my life seemed to split into before and after that moment. Ethan stood in the hallway, barefoot, his small fingers curled tightly into the fabric of his t-shirt. He wouldn't look at me. My son, who used to run into my arms the second I got home, was standing 10 feet away like I was a stranger. I didn't rush him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask a single question. I just walked over slowly and knelt down so we were eye level. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying anymore. That was worse. Kids cry when they're scared. They go quiet when they've learned it doesn't help. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder and said the only thing I could trust myself to say. "You're safe, buddy." My voice came out steady. It didn't match what was happening inside my chest. He shook his head, just once, a small movement, but it hit harder than anything I'd ever heard. He said, "You'd get hurt too." There was no panic in his tone. Just certainty. Rehearsed fear. The kind that doesn't come from imagination. The kind that gets planted. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something that settled in quietly and locked into place. I pulled him into a hug, slow and careful, like I didn't want to startle him. He held on to me tighter than he ever had before. His heartbeat was fast against my chest. Mine wasn't. That was the part that scared me. Because I wasn't confused anymore. I didn't know everything. But I knew enough. I stood there in the dim kitchen light, holding my son while the house felt unfamiliar around me. The same walls. The same furniture. The same pictures on the wall. But something underneath it all had cracked wide open. I thought about Olivia upstairs. About the life we'd built. About the version of reality I'd been living in. And for the first time, I didn't try to defend it. I didn't try to explain it away. I didn't tell myself I was overthinking. I just accepted one simple truth. Something was happening inside my home that my son was afraid to speak about. And someone had made sure he stayed that way. I closed my eyes for a second, just long enough to make a decision. I wasn't going to confront anyone. I wasn't going to ask questions I didn't already have answers to. I wasn't going to lose control. Because whatever this was, it wasn't just betrayal anymore. It crossed a line you don't come back from. I pulled back slightly and looked at Ethan again. "You did the right thing telling me," I said quietly. "You don't have to carry this anymore." He nodded, just barely, like he wanted to believe me but didn't know how yet. That was fine. Belief could come later. Right now I needed truth. And I needed it without anyone knowing I was looking for it. I stood up, turned off the kitchen light, and took his hand. "Let's get you to bed." My voice was calm. Steady. Normal. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Because whoever thought they could scare my son into silence didn't understand the kind of man they just forced me to become. I waited until Ethan fell asleep before I moved again. His bedroom door stayed slightly open, just the way he liked it, a thin strip of warm light stretching across the hallway carpet. I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, watching his chest rise and fall, steady but shallow, like his body had not fully let go of whatever he had been carrying. Then I turned away, quiet as possible, every step measured. The house felt different now. Not louder. Not darker. Just observed. Like I was seeing it for the first time without the filter I had been living behind. Olivia was in the living room when I came downstairs, sitting on the couch with her legs tucked under her, scrolling through her phone. The television was on, some late-night talk show filling the room with canned laughter that sounded hollow now. She looked up when she heard me and smiled, the same easy, practiced smile I had seen 1,000 times before. "He is asleep?" she asked. I nodded once and walked past her toward the kitchen. Yeah. Long day for him. My voice did not change. I poured myself a glass of water, taking a slow sip, letting the silence stretch just enough to feel natural. She went back to her phone. No hesitation. No concern. That was the first confirmation I did not need evidence for. A mother notices when her child is afraid. Unless she already knows why. I set the glass down and leaned lightly against the counter, watching her reflection in the dark window above the sink. Small details. That was where the truth lived. The way her posture stayed relaxed. The way her thumb moved across the screen without pause. No tension. No second glance toward the hallway. If Ethan had told me something like that about a stranger, she would have been on her feet already, asking questions, checking doors, calling someone. But tonight, nothing. Just another evening. Just another lie wrapped in routine. I did not confront her. Not because I was unsure. But because I was certain enough to know confrontation would give her time to adjust. To rewrite. To prepare. And whatever this was, it was already deeper than a simple mistake. I walked back into the living room and sat down in the chair across from her, keeping enough distance that it felt casual. Everything good? I asked. She glanced up again, brief eye contact, then a small nod. Yeah. Just work stuff. Another lie. Smooth. Immediate. Practiced. I studied her for half a second longer than normal, then gave a quiet shrug. Got it. And that was it. Conversation ended. Surface intact. Underneath, everything shifting. A few minutes later, she stood up, stretched, and said she was heading to bed early. I told her I would be up in a bit. She walked past me, close enough that I could catch the faint scent of her perfume, the same one she had worn for years. Familiar. Unchanged. That was the unsettling part. Nothing about her had visibly changed. Which meant whatever had happened, had been happening long enough to become normal. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close upstairs before I moved again. The house went quiet, the television still. Murmuring in the background. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and stared at the blank screen for a few seconds. No anger. No rush. Just clarity. If someone had stepped into my home and crossed the line with my son, I was not going to guess my way through it. I was going to know. Completely. Precisely. And I was going to do it without giving them a single warning. I unlocked the phone, opened a notes app, and started writing down everything I had seen, everything Ethan had said, every detail I could remember. Times. Words. Reactions. Patterns. Not because I was unsure. But because I was building something. Quietly. Carefully. The kind of structure that does not collapse under pressure. When I finished, I looked up at the dark reflection in the window again. Same house. Same life. But I was not the same man standing in it anymore. Because now, I was not trying to hold things together. I was preparing to take them apart. I woke up before the alarm the next morning, not because I was restless, but because my mind had already started moving. The house was quiet, still wrapped in that early gray light that makes everything feel paused. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of the night before settle into something usable. No panic. No confusion. Just a clear line of thought. I got out of bed without making a sound and walked downstairs, careful not to wake anyone. The kitchen felt colder than usual. I brewed coffee, the machine humming softly, and stood there watching the steam rise like it might tell me something I did not already know. Ethan's words replayed in my head, not louder, just clearer. The way he said it. The way he avoided eye contact. The way his body had learned to stay small. That kind of fear does not come from a single moment. It builds. Which meant this had not just happened once. I took a slow sip of coffee and set the mug down, already mapping out the next steps. I was not going to ask Olivia anything. I was not going to watch her reactions and try to read truth through performance. That game was already rigged. If I wanted the truth, I had to remove her ability to control the narrative entirely. That meant evidence. Quiet, clean, undeniable. By the time Olivia came downstairs, dressed for work, everything about me looked the same. Same routine. Same tone. Same man she expected to see. "You are up early," she said, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. I gave a small shrug. "Could not sleep much. Deadlines this week." It was believable. It was also true, just not in the way she thought. She nodded and poured her coffee, already half focused on her phone again. I watched her move through the kitchen like she always did, efficient, calm, untouched. If there was anything beneath the surface, she had learned how to hide it well. Or worse, she no longer felt the need to. Ethan came down a few minutes later, backpack already on, like he wanted to minimize his time in the house. He kept his distance from Olivia without making it obvious, choosing the far side of the table, eyes down, movements careful. I noticed everything. She did not notice anything. Or she pretended not to. That distinction mattered. I drove Ethan to school myself that morning. Normally Olivia handled that, but I told her I needed the fresh air. She did not argue. In the car, Ethan sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the neighborhood passed by. I did not push him. I did not ask questions. Pressure would only make him retreat further. When we stopped at a red light, I glanced over at him and said, calm and steady, "You do not have to talk about anything you are not ready for." He nodded slightly, still looking forward. "But if something ever makes you feel unsafe, you tell me. No matter what anyone says." That made him turn, just for a second. There was hesitation in his eyes. And something else. Relief, maybe? Or the beginning of it. "Okay," he said quietly. That was enough for now. After I dropped him off, I did not go straight to work. Instead, I pulled into a parking lot a few blocks away and sat there with the engine running, hands resting on the steering wheel. This was the point where most people would hesitate. Where they would question if they were overreacting, if they were about to make something bigger than it was. I did not feel that. Not anymore. I reached for my phone and opened a browser, searching for exactly what I needed. Small, discreet indoor cameras. Audio recorders that did not look like recorders. Devices that blended into a room without announcing themselves. I was not rushing. I read specifications, checked reviews, compared options. If I was going to do this, it had to be precise. No mistakes. No gaps. By the time I placed the order, I knew exactly where everything would go. The living room. The kitchen. The hallway leading to Ethan's room. Not to spy on a life. To uncover a truth that had already stepped too far. I put the phone down and looked out through the windshield, watching people move through their normal morning routines. Coffee cups. Phone calls. Traffic. Everything looked ordinary. That was the illusion. Because inside my house, something had already shifted beyond ordinary. And now, for the first time, I was not just reacting to it. I was preparing to see it clearly. Completely. And once I did, there would be no going back. The packages arrived 2 days later, small brown boxes left on the front porch like they belonged to any other normal delivery. Olivia was at work when I brought them inside. Ethan was still at school. The house was empty, quiet in a way that felt different now, like it was waiting. I set the boxes on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment before opening them, not because I was unsure, but because I understood exactly what this meant. Once I started, there was no pretending things were fine anymore. I cut the tape cleanly, one box at a time, laying everything out in front of me with the same care I used at work when precision mattered. Small cameras disguised as everyday objects. A smoke detector. A USB charger. A clock for the living room shelf. Audio devices no bigger than a thumb drive. Nothing complicated. Just enough. I moved through the house slowly, placing each piece where it would see without being seen. The living room first. Then the kitchen. Then the hallway that led to Ethan's room. I did not rush. Every angle mattered. Every blind spot closed. When I finished, I stepped back and looked around. Nothing looked different. That was the point. The system synced to my phone in less than 10 minutes. Clean interface. Live feeds. Recorded storage. I tested each one, watching myself move through the house from perspectives I had never seen before. It felt strange for about 5 seconds. Then it felt necessary. That evening, everything followed the same routine as before. Olivia came home around 6, heels clicking softly against the floor, dropping her bag on the chair like she always did. "Hey," she called out casually. I answered from the kitchen, already halfway through making dinner. "Hey." Same tone. Same rhythm. No cracks. She walked in, leaned against the counter, and glanced at the food. "Smells good." I nodded once. "It will be ready in 10. She smiled, then looked down at her phone again. That was becoming a pattern I could not ignore anymore. Not because of the device itself, but because of how much of her attention lived inside it. Ethan came home quieter than before, but he stayed closer to me now. Not in a way that anyone would question. Just small shifts. Sitting next to me instead of across the table. Standing in the same room instead of drifting away. Olivia noticed none of it. Or chose not to. Dinner passed without anything unusual. Light conversation. Work updates. School talk. The kind of surface-level interaction that fills space without meaning anything. But underneath it, I was watching. Not with my eyes. With patience. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stayed downstairs. Lights off. Just the glow from my phone illuminating the room. I opened the app and pulled up the feeds. Empty rooms at first. Stillness. Minutes passing. I let the recordings run, scrolling back and forth, learning the rhythm of the house from this new angle. The way Olivia moved when she thought no one was watching. The way Ethan avoided certain spaces. The way time stretched differently when silence replaced conversation. Around 11:43 p.m., something shifted. The front door did not open. No sound from outside. But movement in the living room feed caught my attention. Olivia. She had come back downstairs. No lights turned on. Just a faint glow from her phone lighting her face. She moved. Slowly, like she was making sure no one else was awake. I leaned forward slightly, watching the screen without blinking. She walked to the couch, sat down, and waited. That was the part that made my chest tighten, just slightly. Waiting means expectation. And expectation means this was not random. A few seconds later, her phone lit up again. A message, maybe? She typed something quickly, then looked toward the hallway. Toward Ethan's room. Then back at the screen. No hesitation. No guilt. Just calculation. I did not move. I did not react. I just watched. Because whatever came next was going to tell me exactly how deep this went. I did not have to wait long. At 11:52 p.m., the back door opened. No alarm. No hesitation. Just a quiet, familiar movement like whoever stepped inside had done it before. The camera angle in the living room did not catch the door directly, but I saw the shift in Olivia's posture instantly. She sat up straighter, her attention locking toward the hallway entrance. A second later, he walked into frame. Mark Reynolds. Taller than I expected. Confident in the way he moved, like the space already belonged to him. He did not look around. He did not check anything. He just walked straight toward her. That told me everything I needed to know. This was not the first time. Olivia stood up, meeting him halfway, her voice low enough that the audio barely picked it up at first. I adjusted the volume, leaning closer to the screen. Fragments came through. Not everything. But enough. Casual tone. Familiar rhythm. No tension. No fear. Just routine. That was the part that settled something deep inside me. This was not chaos. This was structure. They spoke for a few minutes, standing close, their voices blending into something that sounded practiced. Then Mark glanced toward the hallway, The same direction Olivia had looked earlier. Toward Ethan's room. He lowered his voice further, but the device caught it just enough. He say anything? Olivia shook her head once. No. He knows better. Her tone did not change. Not even slightly. Not defensive. Not concerned. Just matter of fact. Mark exhaled through his nose, like he was confirming a detail on a checklist. Good. Keep it that way. That was it. No argument. No discussion. Just agreement. I felt my grip tighten around the phone, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Ethan had not misunderstood anything. He had not imagined anything. He had been managed. Controlled. Conditioned to stay quiet. And Olivia had allowed it. That realization did not explode inside me. It settled. Heavy. Permanent. Mark moved further into the room, sitting down like he belonged there, like he had done it 100 times before. Olivia followed, sitting beside him, their conversation shifting to something lighter, work, schedules, things that sounded normal on the surface. That contrast was almost worse than the truth itself. They were comfortable. Completely comfortable. Like nothing about this crossed the line. I let the recording run, watching every second, storing every detail. Timestamps. Body language. Tone. Patterns. I was not just observing anymore. I was documenting. Because this was no longer about suspicion. It was evidence. Clean. Undeniable. Around 12:18 a.m., Mark stood up again, stretching slightly, and glanced once more toward the hallway. Just make sure the kid stays quiet, he said, quieter this time, but still clear enough. Olivia nodded. He will. No hesitation. No emotion. Just certainty. That was the moment something inside me locked completely into place. Not because of the affair. That part, I could have handled differently. People make choices. People break things. But this was different. This involved my son. His fear. His silence. His safety. And they treated it like a minor inconvenience. Like something to manage. I set the phone down slowly on the table, the screen still playing, their voices continuing in the background. I did not need to watch anymore. I had already seen enough. I leaned back in the chair, staring into the dark room, letting the weight of it settle without rushing it away. No shouting. No confrontation. No impulse. Just a single, steady thought forming clearly in my mind. They believed control meant safety. They believed silence meant protection. They believed I would never see this. They were wrong. And now everything I did next was going to be done with purpose. I did not sleep that night. Not because I could not, but because there was no reason to. Sleep is for people who still have uncertainty. I did not. By the time the sun started to rise, I had already replayed the footage 3 times, isolating every word, every glance, every silence that mattered. I was not watching as a husband anymore. I was watching as someone building a case. At 6:12 a.m., I turned the phone off and sat there in the quiet, letting the house come back to life around me. Pipes shifting. Floorboards settling. The same sounds I had heard every morning for years. Nothing about them had changed. Only my understanding of what lived inside these walls had. Olivia came downstairs at 6:45, dressed for work, composed, untouched. She greeted me the same way she always did, a casual morning, as she reached for a coffee mug. I returned it with the same tone. No hesitation. No edge. She studied me for half a second, maybe longer than usual, but not enough to raise suspicion. Then she moved on. That was her pattern. Surface level checks. Never digging deeper. Ethan came down a few minutes later, slower than usual, his eyes scanning the room before settling on me. I gave him a small nod. Nothing obvious. Just enough. He sat next to me again, closer than before. Olivia poured his cereal like she always did, asking him about school, her voice light, normal, controlled. He answered in short sentences, careful, measured. I watched the exchange without reacting, noting the distance between them that only existed if you knew where to look. She reached out once, brushing his shoulder as she passed behind him. He flinched. Barely. Most people would have missed it. I did not. And neither did she. Her hand paused for a fraction of a second longer than it should have. Then she kept moving like nothing happened. That told me something new. She knew. Not everything. But enough to recognize the shift. And she chose to ignore it. After breakfast, I drove Ethan to school again. Same quiet car ride. Same careful silence. When we pulled up, he did not rush out like he usually did. He hesitated, hand on the door handle. I looked at him. Steady, calm. You did nothing wrong, I said. No build-up. No explanation. Just truth. He nodded once, then stepped out, closing the door gently behind him. I watched him walk toward the building, small against the wide sidewalk, carrying something no child should have to carry. That image stayed with me longer than anything else. I went to work that day like nothing had changed. Meetings. Emails. Numbers. Conversations that required my attention but not my emotion. On the surface, I performed exactly as expected. Underneath, every piece was already moving into place. During my lunch break, I stepped outside, sat in my truck, and made 2 calls. The first was to a family lawyer. I did not explain everything. I did not need to. I asked the right questions. Custody. Evidence. Documentation. What holds weight? What does not? The second call was shorter. A consultation about child protection concerns. Again, no details. Just structure. Process. Steps. Both conversations gave me the same answer in different ways. Proof matters. Timing matters. And control of information matters more than anything. By the time I hung up, I was not reacting anymore. I was planning. That evening, when I got home, everything looked the same again. Olivia in the kitchen. Dinner in progress. The television on in the background. Ethan doing homework at the table. A picture of normal life. I stepped into it like I always had. Took off my jacket. Set my keys down. Asked about their day. Olivia smiled. Ethan nodded. Routine continued. But now, every second of it felt like a performance I could see through completely. And the difference this time was simple. They were still playing the same roles. But I was no longer part of the same story. Because now, I knew exactly what I was building. And soon they would too. By the third night, the pattern was no longer a theory. It was a schedule. Olivia waited until the house settled into silence before moving. Lights off. Phone in hand. The same careful steps down the hallway, the same pause in the living room, the same message sent before anything else happened. And each time, Mark arrived without hesitation, like he had been invited long before I ever noticed. I stopped watching like a husband by then. I watched like someone collecting pieces that already formed a complete picture. Timestamps lined up. Conversations repeated. The same phrases, the same tone, the same disregard for anything beyond their own convenience. But what mattered was not just that they met. It was what they said when they thought no one else existed in the room. On the fourth night, I heard it again, clearer this time. Mark's voice, low but direct. You need to keep him under control. Olivia did not argue. She did not question it. She simply nodded and said, I am handling it. Handling it. That was the word she chose. Not comforting. Not protecting. Handling. Like Ethan was a problem to manage instead of a child to protect. I paused the recording at that exact moment, and stared at the screen for a long second. Not because I needed to process it, but because I wanted to remember it exactly as it was said. Words matter. Especially when they reveal what someone truly believes. I started organizing everything that night. Not just saving clips, but structuring them. Dates. Times. Key moments flagged and labeled. Every mention of Ethan. Every instruction. Every confirmation. I built it like a timeline that could not be questioned. Because if there was one thing I understood now, it was this. Truth is not enough. It has to be presented in a way that cannot be ignored or rewritten. During the day, I moved through life like nothing had changed. Work stayed consistent. Conversation stayed normal. Olivia continued her routine without any sign of concern. If anything, she seemed more relaxed, like whatever balance she thought she had created was holding. That was her mistake. Stability built on silence always feels secure until the silence breaks. Ethan, on the other hand, stayed close. Not in a way that drew attention. Just small adjustments that only I would notice. Sitting beside me instead of across the room. Waiting for me before going upstairs. Watching me when he thought I was not looking. He was measuring something. Probably whether I meant what I said. Whether he was actually safe. I made sure my actions answered that question. Without needing words. That Friday afternoon, I left work early. Not abruptly. Not in a way that raised questions. Just enough to give me time. I drove straight to the office I had spoken with earlier in the week. The lawyer was exactly what I expected. Calm. Direct. Focused on facts. I did not tell a story. I showed evidence. Short clips. Clear audio. Specific timestamps. No emotion attached. He watched quietly, asked a few precise questions, then leaned back in his chair. "You have more than enough to act," he said. "But timing will determine how effective it is." I nodded once. That matched everything I had already decided. This was not about reacting fast. It was about acting correctly. When I left that office, nothing felt uncertain anymore. Every piece was in place. Evidence secured. Legal structure understood. Next steps defined. That night, when I walked into the house, Olivia greeted me the same way she always did. A smile. A question about my day. Normal. Predictable. Controlled. I answered just like before. Calm. Steady. Present. Because the truth was simple now. They still believed they were in control of the situation. They believed the house was quiet because nothing was wrong. They believed silence protected them. What they did not understand was this. Silence does not protect anyone. It only delays the moment everything becomes clear. And that moment was coming closer with every second they stayed comfortable. Saturday morning started slower than usual, sunlight stretching across the kitchen floor in long, quiet lines. Olivia moved through the house like it was any other weekend, making coffee, scrolling her phone, occasionally glancing at the clock. Ethan stayed close to me, not clinging, just present, like he had learned where he felt safest. I kept everything normal. Same routine. Same tone. Because today was not about disruption. It was about precision. Around noon, Olivia mentioned that Mark might stop by later to drop something off. She said it casually, like it was an afterthought, like his presence in our home had a reasonable explanation attached to it. I nodded once, not questioning it. "That is fine," I said. No reaction. No tension. Just acceptance. Inside, everything aligned exactly the way I needed it to. By late afternoon, the house was set. Not visibly. Not in a way anyone would notice. But every piece was in place. The recordings were backed up. Copies stored securely. The timeline organized. The lawyer ready. And most importantly, the truth contained in a form that could not be denied or reshaped. Ethan was upstairs in his room, door open, within earshot of me at all times. That part was non-negotiable. Olivia moved between the kitchen and living room, checking her phone more frequently now, subtle shifts in her behavior that would have looked normal to anyone else. To me, they were signals. Anticipation. At 4:18 p.m., the doorbell rang. Not the back entrance this time. The front door. That alone told me something had changed. Maybe confidence. Maybe carelessness. Olivia walked over and opened it without hesitation. Mark stepped inside, carrying nothing. No package. No reason. Just presence. "Hey," he said, like he belonged there. I stood up from the couch, calm, steady, and walked into the entryway. For the first time since this started, I did not stay in the background. Both of them froze, not dramatically, just enough to reveal something real. Mark's eyes shifted slightly, recalculating. Olivia's smile held for half a second too long before adjusting. That was all I needed. "Mark," I said evenly, extending a hand. "Good to finally meet you properly." He hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second, then shook it. "Yeah, same here." His grip was firm. Controlled. But there was something underneath it now. Awareness. Olivia stepped in quickly, her voice light, trying to steer the moment back into something normal. "He just came by to drop off some work documents." I nodded, glancing briefly toward the empty space in Mark's hands, then back at her. "Of course." No accusation. No pressure. Just acknowledgement. We moved into the living room together, the three of us sitting in a space that had already recorded more truth than either of them realized. The air felt different now. Not tense. Not loud. Just precise. I let a few seconds pass, enough for them to settle into whatever version of control they thought they still had. Then I reached for the remote on the table and turned the television off. The sudden quiet shifted everything. I leaned back slightly, resting my hands calmly in my lap, and looked directly at Olivia first, then at Mark. "I think it is time we stop pretending this is normal," I said, my voice steady, measured, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Neither of them spoke immediately. That silence was not confusion. It was recognition. Because in that moment, they both understood something at the same time. I was not guessing anymore. I already knew. I let the silence stretch until it turned uncomfortable, watching Olivia shift on the couch, her fingers tightening around her phone while Mark leaned back slightly, trying to measure how much I knew, and I didn't rush to fill the space because the first person to explain loses control, and I wasn't giving that up anymore. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" Olivia asked, her voice controlled but thinner now, and I looked at her calmly. "The last 4 nights," I said. "The living room, the hallway, the things you both said when you thought no one could hear." And that was enough. Mark's shoulders tightened, Olivia's eyes flickered before she tried to recover. "You're overthinking this, it's not what you think," she said quickly. I nodded slightly. "You're right, it's not what I think." Then I placed my phone on the table and tapped the screen, letting the audio fill the room, clear and undeniable, their voices, their words about Ethan, not loud, just factual, and that made it worse. Olivia's expression shifted into realization. Mark exhaled and looked away, already understanding. I paused the clip after a few seconds, the silence heavier now, final, and I leaned forward, voice steady. "You didn't just betray me, you involved my son, you made him feel unsafe in his own home." She opened her mouth but nothing came out, because nothing would matter. I turned to Mark. "And you thought you could walk into my house, make decisions about my child, and leave without consequence?" He didn't argue, because he knew. I leaned back, creating distance. "Everything is documented, audio, video, timeline, legal review in motion." Olivia's breath caught at that, consequence settling in. "You're leaving," I told Mark, and he stood, walked out without a word, no scene, just exit. Olivia stayed, her control gone, and I stood, looking at her one last time. "You'll speak to my lawyer about custody." Then I walked to the hallway where Ethan stood, quiet, listening. I crouched down, met his eyes. "You're safe," I said, and this time he nodded, fear fading into trust, and as I guided him back to his room, I knew nothing in this house would ever be the same again, and it shouldn't be.